everybody, hither and yon, and perhaps especially yon. Those were my preferred cahoots in that equation, historically, you know. I'm Matt Stranick, and you may notice I asked the AI just 10 minutes ago, the Bing AI, to generate a retro music making machine just to see what the AI would think that looked like. And pretty solid choices, I'm going to say. Well
Ah.
done, Microsoft, with your algorithmic secret sauce.
Mm.
Um, how are things with you, Dan?
Not too bad. Not too bad. It's been a pretty decent weekend. We had some company up last night. Some friends of my girlfriend's from back in
Nice.
Amherst came up for one of their every few months get-togethers kind of thing. So it's pretty. Yeah, the house was pretty busy all weekend, but things have calmed down. I made some Christmas cookies yesterday with special butter in them that turned out pretty decent, which was nice. Hence the nap earlier. And yeah, the gingerbread man. It was, not a bad little weekend project.
That sounds like a dope weekend project. If I can
Mhm.
make a infer double
Yeah.
entendre there, my friend. Yeah, yeah. I'm just like, yeah, this whole post cannabis era, it's still like I remember feeling like such a shitbag criminal as a teenager and in my like college years. Like, I'm a degenerate for
Mm,
this, but it's not harmful at all. And geez, they should just tax the shit out of it. And lo and behold, you get what you
they
want. But
did. Exactly.
I'm still puzzled by it a bit. It's just like,
Mm,
I go get my pre-roll at the government store or whatever, and it's just like, man, it just all it had to do to shift was just
yeah.
one, act of government. And yeah, it's like we're still the generation that like remembers the before internet times. We're the
Yes.
last generation to remember the before internet
Oh,
times. It's
yeah.
one of those, I think, right? So
Well, yeah, exactly. Like, I remember my first real internet experiences being like, are you still there? Um, yeah, like my first real internet experiences being like, you know, when I was probably like 18 or 19 at least, and having that, whole stretch of time where it just wasn't a thing. And even then after that, just being like, I've got this email address I check once a week, I guess, Oh, you're muted, Matt. I can't hear you at the moment.
man, I have to forget that now, apart from dealing with the tenuous maritime internet generally, I moved over the past few weeks. I've moved into from the upstairs to the basement suite of the same building, and my landlords are so awesome. I told them I'm just like I need a smaller place. I don't need this much space. I'm a single guy,
Hmm.
and they vacated. They were like, "I'll tell you what. We'll give you the downstairs apartment. We'll move out of it. We'll let you move into it, and we'll charge you like half as much just because we value your tenancy." And I'm like, "This is completely the twilight zone for what's supposed to happen with landlords. You're supposed to say, 'Fine, thanks for the month's notice,' and I'm supposed to say, 'Fine. I hope I get my damage deposit back and be on my way.'" It's pretty yeah. So anyways, man, lot going on. Generally it starts to heat up at this time of year for events and such.
Mm.
And on that note, this episode's been kind of in the works for a little while. This is one of the ones where I can safely say I deferred on it like 5 times and Dan deferred on it like 3. So it's one of
Yeah,
those.
it's
uh,
life sometimes happens, like.
I don't know. My grandmother passed away this past week. I mean, I'm just like, there's just various things that
Yeah,
are like in play. It's just like, why rush anything, right? Is my
exactly.
feeling. So why don't you tell us all about the episode, Dan? Because I'll be danged if I can adequately summarize it as per the intention here.
It was just something that I remember. It's a half a topic I thought might be fun if it was like if we ever did a show where like I came up with a separate list from something you did.
Right.
Just and then also you had mentioned the idea of talking about like ties between punk rock and academia at one point. And I was like,
Yep.
I thought that'd be cool. And I was like, how about we take look at ties between punk rock and academia, and also sort of the more what you might call the more lowbrow side of things. And this is when I throw out that little list I had in my back pocket of ties between punk rock and pro wrestling. That
Pro
I'd
wrestling. So
yes, at
so you did
various
the whole. Yeah. So can I ask? Because I know you
yeah,
sent me your notes, but I haven't actually looked at them yet. So I don't know who's on your list. So by low brow, do you mean you're spanning genres
just
here,
it's
or it's
it
all to do with wrestling? That's my
it's
question.
all to do well what it is. It's like I limited my list to 5 instances of people that were you know involved in sort of the performance and execution of both, like
Okay, fair
equally,
enough.
not just say, because I mean there's plenty, I just, because it's 2023 and people are into a lot of things, like
I'm
just
curious as hell. I'm curious as hell. I want you just to dive in and tell me the
okay,
first person,
all
the
right,
first
so
artist.
the first one is an instance. It's just an instance of somebody having to take a day job between bands,
Yep.
as it were, and but that person taking a day job was Bob Mold. Between his time in Husker Du and his time in
Awesome
Sugar,
choice. Such
and
an
and between those two bands, he did a stint as a producer and writer's assistant with World Championship Wrestling during what is widely regarded as their like worst, just not good era, or like just close enough to sort of the highest of their highs that every not great choice they made just seemed that much worse. And Bob Mould just happened to be the guy who had to go to Hulk Hogan with a list of 10 ideas from the head of creative saying, hey, do you want to do this, this, and this, only to be told that doesn't work for me, brother. um, and yeah, he started working there under the creative regime of a guy named Vince Russo, who, if you mention the name Vince Russo to a diehard wrestling fan, you usually see their blood pressure go up. He's wrestling's instance of, it seemed like in the 90s, almost every genre got taken over by like a guy who worked at a video store who had strong opinions and usually some kind of regional accent. Um, Vince Russo was the former video store manager in question for pro wrestling. Who he was the head writer for WWE when they did a lot of their sort of mid to late 90s stuff with like Stone Cold Steve Austin and all that. Um, he had an ethos known as Crash TV that was just like, let's have as many things happen as possible. Who cares about continuity? Even from the beginning of the show to the end of the show, like as long as it's just getting people's attention. Like somebody's mother was suspended over a ring and a wrestler had to climb up to grab her to win the match at one point. You know, just they WCW was also really trying to like jump in on pop culture tie-ins with like having the star of the movie Ready to Rumble win their championship. And they licensed a wrestler to Kiss at one point. Like Kiss basically hired them to take a guy and dress him up as muscly Gene Simmons, um, and call him the Kiss Demon.
I hate
And
kids so much.
oh, I
Like
do too. And this was the prime of them just like slapping their logo on everything. And
yeah.
yeah, it just so happened that Bob Mould was like a writer's assistant there at that time, behind the scenes, just
Wow.
like doing the shit work. And
Wow.
apparently got the job there because he knew some of the other producers just from like working in entertainment in the Twin Cities. Because Minneapolis is one of the cities that has like a long history in like sort of like the smaller regional era of pro wrestling. There was a company called the AWA that ran out of there that was like, a big part of, I guess, the genre's history at one point. And like Bob Bold kind of grew up going to their show, or like spent a lot of time going to their shows when he lived in the area, and got to do some people involved who eventually were like, hey, young rocker who's experienced with, you know, putting on
Here's a
shows on the
question.
road. Yeah,
Question. Did you read Bob Mold's autobiography?
I have
Shed Low.
not,
It's pretty
but
damn good, man.
yeah,
It's pretty damn good. Your level of detail here is like such that
he's
I thought perhaps,
he did a couple
is
he
it
did a
okay?
couple he did a couple interviews about his time on working with WCW recently with on Chris Jericho's podcast, who's a wrestler and broadcaster and singer for a god awful like hard rock band called Fozzy, amongst other things. Just an all around Renaissance man of sorts. But yeah, he had Bob Mould on there within the past year to talk about his experience like working as a writer's assistant in WCW during this just really not good time.
Cool.
So in my notes I included for everyone for each of my picks I included like a piece of music that the person had worked on, or like something about one of their bands, and then like something wrestling related they were involved with. And so I had a confrontation between the wrestler Chris Kanyon and Judy Bagwell, the mother of wrestler Marcus Buff Bagwell, before the Judy Bagwell on a pole match, which happened a little later on there, from WCW's Thunder TV show. Just the example of like the kind of not great stuff that was happening in WCW at the time. That Bob Mould just happened to be working there for, working there, sort of helping them make as like a day job between bands. Oh yeah, also during that time, the Misfits were also featured as on-screen characters on WCW TV briefly because of a Lucha Libre star from Thunder Bay, Ontario, named Vampiro, who they hired at the time, who was trying to like break into the North American market after getting popular, moving from Thunder Bay to Mexico and getting popular there, and when given the opportunity, having his favorite band brought on to just be his like the guys in his corner during matches, during his time on WCW TV. So it was just like a weird little pop culture crossover time in general that Bob Mould happened to be behind the scenes for. So that was my first pick on my list.
I'm intrigued by so many different aspects of what you drew from there. All I can say is, and I don't even want to know, just I'm going to put it out there, just don't even answer me. I'm hoping that within the 3 or 4 or 6 that you got here, one of these is a Mexican wrestling crossover. That's my sincere hope. Maybe not.
That's I guess the close. I guess I stuck mostly to North American folks. There's actually
that's fine.
Yeah,
that's fine. But
I watch a lot of Japanese wrestling as well. When I do of the wrestling that I watch, and there's over there, like in Japan, like one of the top stars is a guy who wears like a studded leather jacket with like various old SST band logos painted all over it to the ring, named Hiromu Takahashi. And I didn't really get into all that kind of stuff. Like I said, I kept it mostly to North American folks involved with the industry in North America who both were like in bands and involved in like. Yeah.
Okay, this is like the undergrad seminar, not the MA, not the Master of Arts seminar.
Yeah,
we'll get the Master of Arts in
exactly.
Okay, well that's my none too subtle, I guess, transition. Let's call that a none too subtle transition. I'm just gonna say from I'm gonna just start with the most obvious. Clearly. Just a combined post on Greg Gaffin from Bad Religion and Milo Ackerman from The Descendant. Because these are sort of like, if you sort of think of like who immediately comes to mind in terms of your, more popular punk bands that people who know about punk music and, dig the genre will go, yeah. Like, you cannot reasonably argue against anything to do with Bad Religion being a fucking awesome band and like win like by any fucking metric that matters, nor can you do that with the Descendants. I mean, it's just like, it's not to say like to be pedagogic or but dialogical about it. It's simply if you have like an overall negative opinion about either of those bands, then it's just you're into something other than punk music, and that's fine. That's fine. There's many colors on the alternative music rainbow. It's just so. I mean, I'll just in terms of like, and then so in terms of other people you might pick up, I'll be goddamned if I'm gonna get Dexter Holland in here. I'm not like, I'm sure The Offspring is rad to its audience, it just wasn't rad to me, even though I admit they got a bunch of songs that are probably, if you put them on the radio, if I heard them on 90s radio and I'd hear like, "You've got to keep them separated," and I'm in the car, I'll probably start going, "Yeah!" They like the snaky guitar, right? It's like when Epitaph went from being something in friggin', the warehouse, that financed on Greg Garowitz's credit card to being like a viable friggin' commercial entity, right? So anyway, I'm not going to talk about Dexter except that I just did. So I mean, really, so what else? I mean, like anything I can say about Greg Gaffin or Milo, it's like, well, it's already been said, just some nuggets. I don't know. They did have a show in development. There's actually like a pilot episode sitting in some friggin' TV limbo land of like a show about Greg Gaffin, the punk professor.
Oh wow!
Circa 2011. Yeah. So it's just that's one thing. He also. Oh, am I still on? Am I?
Yep, you're still on. You're being heard.
Rad. It's again not just maritime internet, folks. Maritime basement internet. So and what else? I mean, I don't know. It's one thing. It seems that I've observed just by with Milo and with Greg and I guess Dexter too, and I guess others that I've heard of. The hard sciences really seems to be what gets them in. Like you don't hear about like, well, there's a few things I'm going to talk about later, but I mean, generally speaking, it's not like, okay, so one person I was going to put on the list, but didn't, Mo Tucker from the Velvet Underground. She apparently did a PhD in like medieval literature. Just as a post VU thing, right? So, but generally speaking, in terms of, it just seems like, science, one of them studies, Milo studies germs, microbial thingies. And then Greg's thing is, well, okay, so it's zoology, but he looks at anthropology, cultural anthropology, if I'm sort of looking at that right. Apologies, Dr. Graffin, if I'm not. From one doctor to another, whoa! I get to throw it out. I get to I'm a DR. I joined that club. I'm like, it's like the most arduous, like completely nonsensical thing you could do to earn money. Like for the amount of money you can get in a career representative relative to the investment of just sweat and having your ego degraded at every turn. It's just, don't do it unless you absolutely feel you must, is I guess what I would recommend there. I don't know. So just one last thing on these two, awesome musicians who, but then they got their field, right? Like, so Milo, his thing is like, he does the Descendants for a couple of years, then he just ditches it and goes do science for a year or two. And that's kind of how they spaced it out. And that's why, like, and it was like the same musicians, except without Milo, when Milo was like off doing science shit, right? So I just think, you love science, you're in a band that's revered, and you get to tour and probably make some kind of living off that. I mean, which of those counts as your fun, and which of those counts as your day job? I mean, I guess so. A nice thing to have in your life. Where is it like, well, this one somewhat lucrative, creatively satisfying thing, or is it this other? So I just think anybody who can make that, kind of life, career, art balance work somehow to that level, I mean, good on you. And with that, I'll throw it back over to you, my friend.
All right. Just as a side note, I mentioned it in my sort of the end notes of my part. I did think of a band that fit on both of our lists.
Okay.
But just at a certain point of just a certain lineup of the band. It's a band called Manor Farm from Vancouver. I can't remember if I mentioned them on our West Coast episode or not. I think they might have been one of my runners-up.
Okay.
But there was a certain point of that band where they had a guy named Happy Crater playing bass, who was also wrestled on like certain like independent promotions in Vancouver around the late 90s as Strife the Vegan Warrior, doing a straight edge kid gimmick and like coming to the ring wearing like a hoodie with like a bandana over his face and kind of like punching his way while walking down. And their drummer, after the band broke up, ended up becoming a professor of indigenous geography out in like in and around BC. So I just thought it was like, yeah, that's a band that kind of fits on both. But anyways, I guess my next one.
Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah,
please.
I was gonna say my next one can kind of be a twofer just because it's mentioned. It's I picked two people that both work for the same promotion that both also happen to be fairly active musicians, and also just it gives me a chance to talk about, I guess, that promotion in general, which is for the first time in a while, there's actually two major wrestling companies on TV, which wasn't really, hasn't been a thing pretty much since like the late 90s, early 2000s. There's a company called All Elite Wrestling that started in 2019. It's the son of the guy that owns the Jacksonville Jaguars, who's basically just like a big nerd who found a bunch of folks on the indies and decided to create, help put together just a different wrestling company. And anyways, a couple of people that work for that company, that promotion, are Brody King and Andy Williams. Brody King is also the frontman for the hardcore band God's Hate, who they put out a couple full length albums, throughout like the late 2010s. Their last full length came out in 2021. They're big in like sort of like the Southern California end of this Southern California scene. It's him and a couple of guys from a band called Twitching Tongues, who were pretty popular like in the previous decade, sort of in that scene, just like more like the heavier metallic end of hardcore. And yeah, this guy just also, he's sort of big, physically imposing dude, also happens to be a pro wrestler. And in storyline is part of a, I guess what they call a stable, like a little gang type thing called the House of Black, who are all sort of, more sort of creepy gothic themed, and they use music by God's Hate and other bands sort of featuring some of the same folks as their entrance music, on the show. And like it's gotten to the point where like through that, some of the guys from God's Hate have been like just writing the entrance music for wrestlers on this, big promotion you can watch on like TSN on Wednesday nights. With like, guys from the Southern California straight edge band writing the music people that like come down to the ring to. And just in general, like a lot of like there was like a backstage straight edge crew, like amongst some of the wrestlers at AEW at one point. Because there's a guy named CM Punk. I don't know if you've heard that name
I've
at all.
heard of this, and I'm vexed.
Yes.
I don't understand what the deal is with him. I don't understand what
he
his
is
thing is. I don't
a
get
whole other can of worms. But
Okay.
that can of worms is somebody that happened to come sort of, not only he's one of the first people to sort of cross over from like the modern indie scene to WWE and really sort of make that bridge a viable thing, and also happens to be a cantankerous old straight edge hardcore dude.
Okay.
That's basically CM Punk, who is known to do things like he was wrestling for AEW for a while and got fired for starting a fight with the guy, like physically attacking the guy that owns the company backstage at a show because after they got into an argument or something. And getting in like there was a whole it's a whole, like I said, that's a whole other can of worms for different podcasts. I think I used those exact words in my notes. But yes, for a while, this guy who is very much someone comes out of the hardcore scene, sort of in the best and worst ways, just in that, like, imagine a dude who like used to sing in bands and never really got past that like cranky guy who sang in bands and like to just start fights at shows mentality, but like, sort of trying to hold a job in their 40s. And that's CM Punk in a lot of ways. But while he was working,
man of sports. I got
exactly. But while he was with AEW, there was like you'd go on Instagram and see like, hey, here's half a dozen wrestlers going to this AFI show together that are all like, folks like that are from the scene. And yeah, like just in general, AEW has kind of been like they've been, trying to court that market. Like they've been getting really, way more into just like licensing music as well for people to use for their entrances, where like there was a group of wrestlers called the Best Friends who would come to the ring to Where's My Mind by the Pixies at one point. And one of the focal members of that group, Orange Cassidy, his whole gimmick is based on Paul Rudd's character in the movie Wet Hot American Summer. Like, and just, there's a wrestler for AEW named Ruby Soho who,
Are you
got the
serious?
blessing of Rancid before using. She wrestled under a different name with WWE previously, and then was a big fan of Rancid anyway, so got Lars Fredricksson's blessing to use the name Ruby Soho as her ring name, and like has that as her entrance music. Actually, one of the things I put in my notes is Rancid playing her to the ring at one of AEW's pay-per-views. Yeah, and it's just kind of, this is like, and it's it's still, there's still like a lot of chuds that are involved in the wrestling fandom, but just one of the things AEW has been doing is trying to make things cool. I mean, make wrestling cool in certain ways, or like crossover into like, I don't want to say like hipster, but just like folks that are say into like alternative music. Like be like, hey, maybe you want to watch our show where, hey, we've got present things a little bit differently, and like they put out a 12-inch of like like they released a 12-inch of songs that the House of Black, Brody King's like wrestling stable, had used as entrance music, like just sort of as like merch related to the company. And like Brody King himself is just like, big scary tough hardcore dude who's like perfect monster of a wrestler, but also sings in a hardcore band. And when you see him on stage, it's like giant scary hardcore front man, and like carries the pro wrestling vibe over there with him. And also there was another person on my list that I wanted to mention who is another musician that wrestles for AEW, and that is Andy Williams, aka the Butcher of Buffalo, who you might also know as the guitarist from the band Every Time I Die, who have been around because sometimes you want to start a side gig. Like sometimes you get involved in more than one creative process, more than one creative stream at once, and the thing you start working on isn't the one that takes you the furthest, but it's the thing that you can still sometimes get back to stuff you worked on earlier. Are you still there, Matt?
Yeah, I was so like
you just went
shocked and dismayed by what you just said. I shook the virtual background.
You destroyed the AI image.
I just it got shook off the back. Yeah, in real life, IRL. So
yeah. So, anyways, with Andy Williams' whole story is he apparently started out training to be a wrestler before he became a musician.
Okay.
But it was one of those like starting out one thing, then messed up his knee and picked up a guitar. And then next thing you know, he's in a band for the next like 15 years or so. Or 50, I think actually no, they lasted. I think they broke up last year. They started in like the late night, like 1998, and broke up last year. So like 24 years. And then just sort of within around the 2000 teens or so, got reconnected with some of his old friends in the wrestling scene, specifically a guy named Jesse Guimet, who had wrestled, who'd been a pro wrestler under the names Pepper Parks and Braxton Sutter for a couple of different companies, and then had just sort of started going by the Blade. And so they started dressing up in kind of like, tough guy biker gear and calling themselves the Butcher and the Blade. And, Andy started slowly getting back into wrestling. And, they mostly did appearances around like Buffalo and like a lot of like Toronto indies actually. And then to the point of like getting a little bit of attention. And then when AEW was kicking out off sort of around the late, 2018, 2019, they were one of the earlier acts that got signed and brought in. And it's one of those things where it's like he would go on tour with Every Time I Die on the weekends, and then Wednesday nights go on AEW TV and show up like chewing a pork chop on the way to the ring, wearing a monocle and a leather vest, like, and get thrown around by the Hardy brothers or something. And then
Didn't one of the dudes in Every Time I Die go to jail for buying steroids illegally?
I don't think that's the key. I don't know.
No, it's Avenged Sevenfold. Shit,
yeah, it was Avenged
sorry.
Sevenfold. No, Every Time I Die broke
My
up
bad.
because
I always mix up those bands. I'm sorry.
they broke up. I know. There's that whole like 2000s kind of like metalcore thing. Or
Yes.
metalcore scene that
Some
like,
of it is worthy, I'm sure, but most of them
and
just
that's
like,
it.
really?
Like Every Time I Die are a pretty decent band. Like, and I actually gave them a bit more of a shot because being like, oh hey, I've seen Andy Williams wrestle before. Like that's cool. And yeah, I just thought it was funny that somebody would go like, it's just be able to do like a touring musician on the weekend, and then just Wednesday nights go on TV as a pro wrestler, and just kind of ridiculous get up. Like I said, he wears like a monocle a lot of the time and has like a big mustache and like wear like a leather vest and like a butcher's apron or something, and like we'll like chew on a pork chop or like eat a big sandwich
pork chop.
while walking to the ring.
As one does in a work
environment. And his tag team partner, the Blade, will wear like a creepy mask. Like, and sometimes they have the Blade's wife, the Bunny, accompany them as well. And it's all just like silly and fun, but it's just kind of cool to see somebody like just actively pursue both. And like towards the end of Every Time I Die's existence, they were even like working like wrestling matches into like they would do a big charity show in Buffalo every year called Merry Tidmas. That was just like it's like the Yola Tango like Hanukkah shows where it's like here's the band and all of their friends sort of showing up to do guest performances, that kind of deal. But they started towards the end of it, they started having wrestling matches as well because of Andy Williams' connections to that scene. And there's like you see videos of like the band playing on stage, and then like Orange Cassidy, the wrestler with the Wet Hot American Summer gimmick, like stage diving while they're playing and stuff. Like, yeah. And it's just kind of a cool little, just cool little examples of how, I guess, alternative music and the current iteration of the pro wrestling scene have been crossing over lately, I guess.
Your knowledge and commitment to this topic then has to be commended. I mean, I wouldn't expect less, but I mean, you're really like diving into a pretty fantastic level of detail there. I can't, recreate it exactly, I'm sure, but that's sick. Sick is what that is.
Yeah,
I do follow the Hulkster on Instagram because
he's a whole.
It's so off the rocker.
Yeah,
Southern Florida, rich white guy, bizarro land. It's like,
that's
he still looks this. He's looked 45 since he was 29. That guy.
He's like an old. He's something.
He's a G. I mean, it's just like it's unique. It's like, and it's just well done, brother. If you're checking this out, Ulster, like the positive life affirming aphorisms. There's some really scummy stuff about Hulk Hogan.
Oh yeah, he's horrible. He's
incredibly scummy things that he got sued for, involving like the dude from Creed and like.
There's that. There's all the stuff. There's stuff that he got on tape saying with that Man-Cow guy or whatever. Like just. He's like the Chicago shock jock dude. Yeah, he's had a whole
existence. I'm like
there's that guy is a whole piece of work in an industry that has many people that could be described as pieces of work. He is definitely one of them.
Over decades since like you and I were in elementary school.
Like it's just been so. And so many years, he just like pops up every once in a while. It's because it's like he had his 80s run with the WWF, and then in the 90s he worked for WCW World Championship Wrestling for a while and kind of had a little bit of a career renaissance, and then he just sort of pop up every now and again. It's like he's got actually one of the other people that was really involved with WCW, a guy named Eric Bischoff, who's kind of like a semi-successful, semi-failed reality TV producer guy. It's like him and Hogan would just manage to like get their little teeth into whatever they could and just be like, okay, now we both have jobs here, and now our friends have jobs here, and now we're just going to do everything we can to just keep our jobs here and just be awful.
Hollywood
Anyways.
Hulk Hogan.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, man. Well, again, thanks for the edifying.
That was my
You might say
And
an
over to you.
academic level. You might say an academic level of knowledge. I had to stretch on this, but I was going to be goddamned and a half if I did not take a significant part of this show, at least for me, to talk at length, which doesn't actually mean very long, but about the new Shotmaker 3 record set that just came out.
I'm waiting for my copy to arrive.
I am so I'm so broke for record buying compared to what I was even like 6 months ago. But that's just a moment of thing that's just kind of transiting. But honestly, what I'll just say is I didn't even really know anything about the dudes in Shotmaker, particularly even when this I bought this. But just in preparation for this episode, I'm like, I'll bet there's some tie-in somehow to this in a legitimate way that isn't just me kind of just prying something in. And so to that, I'll say my first stop, from the Google machine was going to a pretty rad. You probably heard of this. I actually mentioned my notes. Dan's probably heard of this, but it's new to me. The Washed Up Emo podcast. Are you aware of this?
Yes.
Would you like to tell us anything about it? Because
I'm not all that. I haven't listened to it too much. I've only listened to 1 or 2 episodes prior to the. Is it Nick?
Right.
The guy's name from Shotmaker. Because that particular episode is like one of the few episodes of that show that I've listened to. Actually,
it seems like I went to it just because I saw on Instagram or whatever, and it's like. They're at their like 300 and something episode, and I'm like, oh shit, there's probably some number of things I would probably enjoy if I scroll through their archives, But that's quite beside the point, I suppose. So I was quite pleased upon finding out, which you'll know if you listen to the episode, is that Nick actually is now not only a really well-regarded, I guess, multimedia artist. I'm thinking of the Eric Hill of his sort. How Eric does, right? That kind of art. Like, I mean, back in the day, I'd go up and see, at the UNB Art Center or whatever. And, Eric would be up there with the machine. Like, I want to say it's like a projector at a turntable, but that's not what the hell it was. But you know what I mean? It's like that kind of, and to actually go and experience those kind of performances. I mean, it's like it was a pretty cool thing. So, shout out to Eric if you ever listen to this, which I probably don't because you've got better things to do. But still, speaking of cool people doing 2 jobs, or like an artistic thing and then a regular thing. So. But anyway, so Nick from Shotmaker actually now has a master's degree, MFA, and he teaches at OCAD. He is a department head for, I guess, probably their media art department or whatever at Ontario College of Art and Design. And that is from one academic, to another. I mean, I just had to look at this stuff. I read this between what's in the show notes and just other stuff I garbled off the internet and whatever. I'm like, that dude turned 16 on the stage of friggin', in the States, friggin' San Francisco, friggin'
Gilman Street.
Thank you. Yes, he played it on his 16th birthday. And so like they were literally just these three like poor-ish dudes from like outside Ottawa,
Yeah, like
and
a small
family,
town.
small friggin' town, smaller than Fredericton, which to
Oh,
me just
definitely.
like like just small, and
Yeah.
like it's like the family like throws together enough money for them to get this van that they just throw everything into like making serviceable, and then they get a copy of friggin' Book Your Own Fucking Life from Maximum Rock and Roll, which I guess was a thing,
Oh,
and
that
they
was.
just
I have to say, I got very nostalgic. I had like a little burst of nostalgia when I heard them talk about that because I hadn't seen one of those in a while. But there was a brief window of time where that was like a Bible if you were going to do any kind of touring, because it was just like, yeah, literally just like a little magazine of just like, hey, here's a city, and then like these people will put on your show. These people will probably let you stay here. Here's some record stores or something you might want to check out. But just
and
like,
yeah. And Nick on the podcast described, like that was the format, that was the venue that
yeah.
they used. They pressed up a 7-inch, a few days before they went on tour, and just for 3 years they just did it, relentlessly. And this dude's like literally like I'm 45, and I'll be damned if he's much older than me at all, really. Probably about the same age, and he's just like, and it's like I see like his academic-ish stuff out there a little bit, and I'm just like, this is what you'd expect for a guy at this point in that kind of career. And he just kind of looks back on the maker stuff as like, that set me up for everything I'm doing now. It was like running away to camp, or from just joining the circus every summer, basically. They played something like 300 shows a year or something like that, or 200 shows a year. Sorry, 300 would be insane. 200 shows a year during their whole run. And they just, so for that kind of story, I mean, I just think that's a very relatable story. I think for people like of our generation, of our general age, I mean, even if people like didn't, quite manage, to pull it off, like the whole just tour the U.S., no matter what, that level of it, it's still like, you got your normal life carrying on, and you just, you're young where you're not too committed to things, and you just have the ability to throw yourself into it. So I just think anybody, they're one of the best examples of like a band of that genre, of that era, that I just gravitate towards. I mean, like I don't know that if I was a different age or whatever, that I would just throw it on as much as I could. But like with that set, I mean, when I put on the second record and I realized it was like just Crayon Club from start to finish, and it was remastered. Like, oh man, like
I am
I
so.
just have such fond goddamn
now.
memories of that record. I just listened to it. It hasn't aged a day to me.
Oh yeah.
Like I'm just straight up fanboy here. Like that particular album. And then it's just having all the stuff from the 7 inches and stuff, which I've spent a lot of money getting on Discog. And it was like, so I mean, just having it all on one thing, neatly cleaned up with some awesome art. So Nick actually did the art. This is a really talented visual artist. The vinyl's friggin' gorgeous, sharing different colors. So anyway, thanks Nick for achieving that master's degree, and just in terms of what the others are up to, I mean, I think you probably do a full. So he ended up over in Toronto, right? Ultimately, within his academic career, the guitar player name I don't recall honestly, but he is like a high-profile freelance writer with the he writes for architecture pieces for the New York Times.
Ooh.
Like very highbrow, art kind of career. And then Matt Deline, he I think I don't know what the hell his day job would be, but he's still like, I mean, the last thing with his name on it, which I think I've alluded to in previous shows, like Dark Plane, I want to say Dark Plains. he's done a lot of he's remained in Ottawa, and he's still part of the scene as far as I know, doing some version of weekend awesome art rock or whatever. So yeah, man. So there we go. I feel so good to be speaking about that record because I haven't looked forward to a record set coming out quite as much, as that. So I
Yeah.
think it's safe to say we're doing a couple more episodes, hopefully, before the end of the year. And here's a spoiler alert: Dan's already let me know that we're going to be talking about our end of year favorites. So I'm sure I'll have another opportunity to gush quite soon on that one. So anyway, pal, over to you. What's your next one, bud?
All right. I think for I guess for what I'll do is I'll do one more and then save one for the notes. And this is not so much punk rock, but more sort of alternative rock in general.
Okay.
Were you familiar with the fact with what Billy Corgan has decided to spend his some of his Smashing Pumpkins money
dear
on
God! I'm so glad you're talking about this because I follow him on Instagram and I'm like, this shit is nuts. This shit is nuts. Okay,
it is not good. But yeah,
it's not good.
So, anyways, the thing is, the National Wrestling Alliance is like that's a pretty historic brand in the world of pro wrestling. It's basically before the WWF was a thing. They were that was the name of the cartel of promoters that basically ran professional wrestling in North America for decades and decades and decades up until the 80s. I meant to bring our copy of it down with me, but there's a really good book called The Death of the Territories by a guy named Tim Hornbacher. If you ever want to read about sort of that era of sort of how pro wrestling was organized in that era and how it changed once sort of Vince McMahon decided to, started working on establishing a monopoly in the industry. But anyways, the NWA brand always was kind of floating around. It's like it was basically it became much less of a thing after the 80s. Just this brand in general and sort of the likeness of the title belt that they used and that sort of thing. And it was still just kind of floating around with who could afford it. Usually somebody with a bit of nostalgia and a bit of cash would be like, oh, hey, I'll buy the rights to this. And we'll have, some local guy will carry the NWA title for a while. And, it'll just sort of keep going in some form.
I'm wearing my Thrash Wrestling shirt today, by the way, for this episode.
If you ever watched the Tiger King documentary, the professional wrestling event that Joe Exotic helped put on at one point, I think was vaguely NWA affiliated during some of the promotion's off years. Let's put it that way. But in towards the late 2000 teens, a couple of people, I think Dave Lagana, I can't remember if it was Dave Lagana, I can't remember the name. It was Dave Lagana or Dave LaGreca was the name of one of the guys. And then Billy Corgan and a couple other people put the money together to buy the rights to the name National Wrestling Alliance and all associated championships and that kind of deal. And basically the company was theirs now. And they decided to first bring it back by starting a YouTube channel, a YouTube series called 10 Pounds of Gold, where they picked this kind of Superman looking British wrestler and put the title on him and had him travel around to local promotions. Nick Aldis, that was the guy's name. And had Nick Aldis carry this old time NWA title that looked exactly like the old time one that they used to use in the 60s and 70s and early 80s and that kind of deal. And managed to get there was an event in 2018 called All In. That was at the time, it was the largest event outside of the WWE, largest pro wrestling event outside of the WWE in North America in I don't know how many years, where they had a little over 10,000 people there. And one of the featured matches was this guy, Nick Aldis versus Cody Rhodes for the NWA title. And that kind of, Cody, they put the title on Cody at the show just to sort of, get a little more attention on the NWA and let people know it was back. And it was really sort of positioned as hey, do you like your wrestling with retro vibes? Like, come check out the NWA. Like, they licensed a song by Dawkins to use as the theme music for their weekly YouTube show. And like everything looked like, the way that like 80s game shows, everything looks like it's like just made out of styrofoam and then covered in like just like shitty
Schlack.
sparkles. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's what the sets for like the backstage sets for like the NWA YouTube show looked like on purpose to give it like this very like 80s retro, this like old
What you're
time retro
describing
throwback
doesn't
look.
sound terrible on its
That's
face,
just it.
though.
It started out okay, but
Yeah.
they kind of leaned a little too far at first. They hired a guy named Jim Cornette, who is a little controversial. He's really great if you want to know a lot about a very specific era of professional wrestling in a historical context, and just don't let him talk about anything else. Like one of those kind of people. Unless you just, and he's cultivated, like, basically he makes his money like being a troll on the internet in a lot of ways, and just like saying horrible things about current wrestling for his army.
Do what you love and get paid. That's
exactly.
The dream, right? That's.
But at the same time, if there's something between, say, like 1978 and 1995 that you need to know about, he is probably one of the best historians. And they'd hired him as a commentator, and he's an old-time Southern wrestling guy. Sometimes old-time Southern wrestling guys have jokes that they like to use that are not really cool these days.
Right.
And it started out. It's like, I feel like the
Confederacy lost the Civil War. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, Cornette's politics are complicated in a lot of ways. But at the same time,
that's far enough into apologizing for the jokes that you need to do.
Yeah, joke is like he made a joke. He made just some bad, stupid, racist jokes on commentary, and it was just like he got fired for it. But at the same time, some of their fans got mad that he got fired for it, and it's just, it's really much in court. Like people. I feel like you get a certain kind of people that long for a certain era of the past when things were different, if you know what I mean. Right. And it kind of eventually, that's kind of, it started to feel like that was what the NWA was kind of leaning towards in terms of like the fan base they were cultivating. And then they put the title on a guy named Tyrus, who used to wrestle for the WWE as the Funkasaurus Brodus Clay. Who was supposedly a dancing dinosaur of some sort. He was just a really big guy who'd wear like a red tracksuit and kind of poorly dance to a song called "Somebody Call My Mama" on his way to the ring, but eventually became a Fox News commentator while still wrestling. And he became, Billy Corgan's new champion. And would bring the NWA title on Fox News to go on like the Gutfeld show and stuff like that, like wearing their title belt and it's like, National Wrestling Alliance champion Tyrus, and would just say like horrible, he had some pretty nasty things to say about, like, if his kids ever came out as gay, like that kind of stuff.
Great.
And
the world is a vampire, so.
And also, is just, the guy is not the greatest athlete. Also, the NWA kind of absorbed the dregs of like after COVID happened, like a lot of people got, like the WWE fired a lot of people, like a lot of people that are working for them go, and a lot of like weird little experimental promotions are kind of popping up with people trying to do stuff online, and one of them was this very like right libertarian, like anti-cancel culture themed promotion called Control Your Narrative, and that didn't last very long because it was poorly organized and everybody involved was just a dumbass. But sort of the dregs of that, after that failed, some of the dregs of that, including their former champion, a guy named the Overman EC3, all sort of got absorbed, hired and picked up by Billy Corgan's NWA. And leading to the fateful Tyrus versus EC3 championship match that I included a link to in my notes that I would not advise watching all of because it is very, very, very bad. Like just in all ways, like it's like I enjoy pro wrestling and I enjoy a lot of different kinds of pro wrestling. And this is just not enjoyable, but it's something that exists in the world. It's like this is what Billy Corgan has put out there using his own money as his, and like, you know, when people would mention it, this kind of stuff to him, he'd just be like, look, you know, we're not afraid to like bring, you know, controversial opinions and get people talking about stuff.
Said
Like
every
just say like that kind of
libertarian privileged asshole ever anywhere. But
and they almost had an actual cable TV deal until he decided at one of their pay-per-views to have sort of the evil bad guy stable of wrestlers in celebrating their victories for the night, have one of them pick up a little mirror and pretend to snort something off it on camera between matches.
keeping
And,
it real.
you know, yeah. And then there's, you know, their TV deal kind of didn't happen so much after that. Yeah. And just like that has just been, it's just, unfortunately, that's just been like the Billy Corgan wrestling promotion experience. And it's so weird seeing him because he just looks like a different, you know, it's like even just seeing him on stage is one thing, but then seeing him just, he looks like, it's like he ages 20 years when he puts on a rumpled tracksuit and stands next to this like awful man, you know, this awful guy like Tyrus or something, or one of his other wrestlers. And just, yeah, it's just like, is this the same person that made some music that I liked way back when? And like there's video footage you can find of like recent Smashing Pumpkins concerts where he's like invited some of his performers on stage and they just all seem very awkward. Just kind of like, you know, just a bunch of wrestlers in their ring gear kind of like awkwardly dancing like this while he's, you know, running through bullet with butterfly wings for the umpteenth time. But yeah, it's just one of those like, you know, you feel bad for people on, you know, feel bad for just the idea of Smashing Pumpkins and the idea of pro wrestling when you see the stuff that Billy Corgan's kind of put out there in the world. But like in talking about the crossovers of like punk and alternative and wrestling and stuff, where those might meet, it's like definitely have to mention it. Definitely not good.
Man,
but had to mention it.
You know, that seems to me like actually quite a decent way to go out on the show.
Oh yeah, for
because,
sure. That's,
you know, we're like, you know, hitting the hour mark here. I have to say, I think we have to do some kind of follow up to this, just because I've learned one hell of a lot, and yeah, no, this is great, and I've got, you know, a few more kind of paragraphs written. The last person, you know, that you know, one of the people on my list, I was thinking, you know, that I would speak to on the show, Kira from Black Flag, because she has gone on to have an amazing career as a Hollywood and indie sound designer, sound artist. Yeah, and she during the years when Black Flag was like, besides Damaged and besides you know, the first 4 years kind of era, anything that you think about with Black Flag that's remotely good has her on it, because for the 2 or 3 years that she was with Black Flag, they put out like 5 records, and they toured around her schedule for, and this is the academic part that I was able to sneak in, her being, you know, from her program at I don't know, it's not UCLA, but, you know, like a local university. They kind of accommodated her academic schedule so that she could play and then tour. And then at one point, from Jim Rulin's book about SST, The Rise and Fall, they gave Greg Ginn just basically said, well, we're going on tour during the fall, and if you don't come with us, then you're not our bass player. And she just decided to finish out her final year of her program instead. And she subsequently, you know, had some musical involvements with Mike Watt from the Minutemen and some things like this. But she more or less sort of moved into film at a really high level. She was part of the team that won Academy Award for the sound design on Mad Max Fury Road. Right?
I didn't know
And
Kira worked on that movie. That's one of my absolute favorite movies, actually.
yeah, well, she did win. She was like the lead, one of the heads of the team or something, and she's down as having received the Grammy for that. And now, just actually this same week, the prequel to that, Furiosa, is
Yes.
out. And I just sort of now wonder if the same, sound design team, which I would assume would include Kira, is involved in this, but I haven't gone into Googling down that rabbit hole quite so much yet. But yeah, okay.
All
So
right.
there. That's the last
All right.
I'll speak to here. And I think we each have a couple more in the notes.
Yeah.
So yeah, man. I'm looking forward to. I'm glad we had this one, and
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to. Hopefully, we'll get the next one maybe a little bit sooner out of the
Yes,
gate.
definitely a little bit sooner.
A little bit sooner. This was kind of an outlier, even by our standards. So
Yeah.
But yeah, man. So anything else before we shut her down here, pal?
No, that's just about it for me. Have a great week, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care, everybody. See you again, hopefully sooner than later.
All right.